We're going to take a look at evangelical movements during this session, and I'm going to move fairly rapidly because you've already covered some of this material in your reading. Looking at the Puritans and the Pietists and their origins in Europe, looking at the English Reformation and the kind of the dual response among the English reformers. Some of the history is covered adequately in some of the other readings, as well as in the textbook. But to look at the Anglicans and just how there was still this aspect of Catholicism that was there, and the tie of the church to the monarchy was still present. Though there was a struggle, would the Anglicans become more Protestant or more Catholic? And there was an unsettled kind of middle ground that Elizabeth helped negotiate, and this concept of the middle way became the Anglican ideal. The reformers of the Church of England were the Puritans, who wanted to purify what was to take place among the Protestants in England. To hear more of the the Puritan ideal, they saw themselves as a city on a hill, an example, the ones to kind of set the standard in terms of their life, particularly in how they worked, that they were known by this particular ethic, that their vocation was what would exemplify themselves as being God's chosen, and that they were not to, they were misunderstood as trying to abstain from various actions and behaviors. Rather, they sought moderation. And one of those misunderstandings came through the early 20th century writer Mencken, who said that Puritanism is the haunting fear that someone somewhere is having fun. Though that is not a fair characterization of Puritans. They were also known for their intellectual ideals and their desire to bring about the results of one's internal spiritual change into society, and that responsibility in that setting. Unfortunately, in American history, they're also known for the witchcraft trials that occurred in Massachusetts, in the Massachusetts colony, as well as later wars with Native Americans. Some other notable missionaries that came from Europe and moved into North America were the Jesuit Black Robes, particularly among the Native Americans of New France, which would be Quebec, northern kind of Maine, northern New York, what is currently New York, and the Puritan missionary John Eliot among the Algonquins in Massachusetts colony. In fact, the very first Bible printed in the American colony was in the Massachusetts language of the Algonquin people, and it was Eliot's translation of that work in 1633 that became that first translated printed Bible in the American colonies. And also a little known aspect of missionary work in the New World was through the Russian Orthodox Church, who actually spread across the Aleutian Islands, down through present-day Alaska, down through the western edge of Canada, present-day Canada, into northern California. In fact, the Spanish settlements, the missions that developed along the western coast of California, were only 40 miles from the southernmost Russian settlements that dipped down into Washington and into Oregon, and eventually into northern California. There was among the Pietists this search to bring about a revigoration of one's spiritual life, that one believed a creed, they belonged to a church, but what did they really live? How did their belief enter into their life? And out of the devastation of the 30 Years' War, we see a revival of personal piety. Philip Jacob Piner began small schools of prayer, and he didn't start with the question, are you a Christian, which was, do you believe a set of beliefs, but rather, do you love Jesus? Do you have this personal affinity, a personal desire, a personal movement toward God? In his work in 1675, translated from the Latin into English, Pious Desires, he writes, if only we evangelicals would make it our serious business to offer God the fruits of his truth and fervent love, there's no doubt that God would give us the pleasure of seeing others whose error we now lament alongside us in the same faith. Holiness of life itself contributes much to conversion. And this is also an aspect you see in Thomas Oden's chapter that you have on the Moodle page that discusses how Thomas Fletcher's life, his pious work as a Christian minister, also is an impetus toward conversion, toward evangelism. The Pietists never separated from the church, but saw themselves as a church within a church. Clergy training was a necessity, but at the same time, there needed to be a transformation of the heart of the clergy, that they also must be truly converted, which wasn't always a standard. And the University of Hull became a center of uniting a desire to build the intellect and the spiritual life at the same time. I'll just briefly look at this missionary who you can take a closer look at in the textbook, but just an overview of some of his work there as an example of Pietist missionary work during that time. Let's take a look at mission in America. The New World was definitely a place where God was at work, and he was at work through those coming from Europe into this new land. Though it was new to those who were entering it, although there were others who had been there for much longer than them. However, there are some aspects of their initial entrance into this place that helps us identify some of their priorities that still are with us today. The first is denominationalism. In other words, you belong to a church of your choice, not because you were born into a particular state or society that determined your religion of choice, like it was occurring in Europe. If you were born in Switzerland, you were a Protestant. If you were born in France, you were a Catholic. Not so in these new colonies. Puritanism was very much a priority, that there was a connection between one's social engagement and one's personal faith, and what you did socially, how you expressed yourself with your vocation, was an expression of your personal faith and trust in God. And also the whole concept of frontierism, where pilgrimages were very well known throughout Europe, but there were also definitive destinations to those pilgrimages. Here, the destination wasn't so much as important as the movement toward this new horizon. And revivalism was also a major development in the beginnings of American Christianity. That the new birth is the purpose that we seek God, and that the search for this purpose is really what everything else is about. In fact, you see some of this in present day writings and evangelical Christians such as Rick Warren in The Purpose-Driven Life. Some of the earliest expressions of Christianity can be seen in the example of the Quakers. George Fox led a radical group of Puritans known as the Puritans, known as the Quakers, eventually coming to be known as the Friends, and today known as Evangelical Friends, and very prominent in Ohio. They were very zealous, extremely self-disciplined. They viewed themselves as seeing the need for a believer to discover the inner light of Christ that was already present in each person, but maybe not noticeable or recognized. And so this search for this inner light and to recognize this value in all living people was a priority among the Quakers. However, among that provided an egalitarian view of their society. Wasn't taken so well through the Massachusetts Bay Colony, who eventually ejected the Quakers into what was known as Penn's Woods. And William Penn was an aristocrat and follower of George Fox, and he asked the British Crown directly to give safe haven to the Quakers. And this area, Penn's Woods, came to be known as Pennsylvania, and the prominent city in this colony was Philadelphia, to become a center of Quaker influence not only then but into today. The Pietists were also attracted from Germany, and again, some of this is covered in the textbook, but I just want you to know that various proponents of German Pietism come through the Mennonites and through Amish communities, and they were known for their craftsmanship, and that craftsmanship kind of preceded them, and that was kind of their expression of this deep personal piety expresses itself in a strong way. Also, the Moravians were a part of the Pietist movement and were known, interestingly enough, for their music. And Ben Franklin actually talked about going to their churches so he could listen to good music. And there was this sense of, even though they are simple people who learn trades and contribute to the community during the day, they earn their living through this work ethic, they can express a high artistic value through their hobbies and through the things that are beautiful. There was also an attraction in these colonies to Anglicans and the Catholics. So you read a little bit already about some of the reform movements in both groups. Safe havens were created for them in Maryland, primarily for the Catholic settlement, and among Anglicans in the South, in the Carolinas, and in Georgia. Other groups were also attracted to the New World, primarily the Baptists to Rhode Island, led by Roger Williams, who was probably most well known today for his emphasis on religious liberty. And the Dutch Reformed were settling in New Amsterdam, now known as New York City. And then there was a scattering of Methodists and other groups throughout the new colonies, and all of these groups together became a catalyst for American spirituality through the Great Awakening. Taking a quick look at the Great Awakening and its anti-Enlightenment perspective. In other words, the Enlightenment suggested that the center of the most important thing that we need in order to know the world around us, in order to succeed in the world around us, is this emphasis on the human rational mind. And the center of the universe was the human. I think, therefore I am, as Descartes said. And the Great Awakening said that may be true, and we'll still hold that that is true. However, there is also a matter of the heart and the life when it comes to religion. And there was a rejection of outward religiosity, that, the expression of one's faith as attending church or being a part of a church or kind of being knowledgeable of things of God was not enough. That there needed to be an inward compulsion to live completely for Him. Some of this is seen in the Moravians, how they impacted John Wesley as they were traveling across the Atlantic. The ship they were in entered into a storm, and while Wesley cowered in a corner, scared for his life, afraid of death, the Moravians were singing hymns together in praise of God in the midst of the storm. And this had a great impact on the young missionary going to the Georgia colony. There was an emphasis also in outdoor preaching. The most famous is George Whitefield, who was known to hold the attention of large crowds with his booming voice and his engaging style of preaching, and was a early compatriot of the Wesleys, as well as Jonathan Edwards. However, Jonathan Edwards is also kind of like the other side of the spectrum. Brilliant mind, though not known for his engaging preaching. In fact, many said that it had to have been the Holy Spirit that brought about the revivals that occurred under his preaching, because it could never have been his droning, high-pitched delivery. And we do know that his emphasis on holy living, his emphasis on seeking God directly, played a large part and a prominent part in the Great Awakening. Some results, we see some discord develop between those like the Quakers and those who are part of the establishment church. We see increased missionary work and educational influence that extended, began with the development of schools for preparing preachers, and developed eventually into some of the largest, most influential universities in this present United States. Some other results also occurred among the disestablishment of churches, which was the separation of churches from oversight of the state, in which church maintenance and clergy salary would not be paid through the taxes. Rather, they would have to find their own means of support. Also, the deist challenge from some of the popular writers of the day like Paine and Jefferson and Thoreau, which viewed God as existing but distant. And of course, the Haystack Revival, which you can read more about in the textbook. that continued the overseas movement of the gospel during this time.